You're trying to get past all the noise, right, to really understand what's going on.
That's what we aim for here.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into this analysis from Rizzo International. It's called Israel on the Brink of Collapse.
Published March 28th, 2025, using data up to March 21st. So fairly recent for its publication date.
And our mission really is just to unpack it. What are the core arguments? What's the data they use to back up this picture they're painting of Israel's situation?
Yeah, and it covers a lot of ground. It's not just one thing. They look at the economy, society, the psychological state, demographics, politics.
And internal stability, too, you said.
Exactly. It's presented as a multifaceted crisis in this particular analysis. It's definitely not painting a rosy picture.
Okay, let's dive into the economy first. The analysis uses strong language, catastrophic economic collapse.
It does. They claim it's the worst since 1948, which is a huge statement.
And they throw out some big numbers. Military losses reported at $34 billion.
$34 billion. And then a total economic loss figure of $67 billion.
67. Wow. And the budget deficit.
$40 billion. Described in the analysis, again, as the largest in Israel's history.
When they say military losses, $34 billion, what does that typically cover? Is it just equipment?
Well, the source doesn't break it down fully, but you'd assume it's operational costs, equipment damage, maybe replacement, possibly even lost productivity from people being mobilized.
Right. It's a significant chunk of change, however you slice it.
No question. And that $67 billion total loss figure would obviously be much broader.
Okay. And the analysis gets specific about 2024, doesn't it? Business closures.
Yeah, they mentioned 60 businesses closing and the jobs that went with them.
And tourism, I remember reading that took a huge hit.
A 70% fall, according to the analysis. They translate that to a $5 billion loss.
70% is massive for tourism.
Oh, absolutely. And construction wasn't spared either.
Yeah.
They report a $4 billion loss there, with over 70 companies apparently going bust.
So what's the ripple effect of problems in sectors like tourism and construction?
Well, it's significant. Tourism hits hotels, airlines, yes, but also, souvenir shops, local guides, transport, construction impacts suppliers, real estate, lots of trades.
It's not contained.
Exactly. And the analysis uses all these figures, these sector-specific problems, to argue that Israel's very ability to keep funding the war effort is being put at risk.
Okay, let's shift gears. The analysis talks about forced displacement of Israelis. That sounds serious.
Very. They cite a figure of 143 Israelis fleeing their homes. This is attributed to the war and fear of reprisals.
Specifically near Gaza and the northern border areas.
That's what the analysis states, yes. Settlements near Gaza and up north.
143. It's such a specific number. Does the analysis say where it comes from?
It actually doesn't detail the methodology for that specific figure. It could be official data, maybe survey data, but they don't specify.
But the core point isn't just the number, is it? It's the fear.
Precisely. The analysis really emphasizes that element. They argue that even if ceasefires happen, many people are simply too afraid to go back home.
And this fear, this reluctance to return, the analysis connects this to people leaving the country altogether, a mass exodus.
That's the link they draw, that this internal displacement driven by fear and instability contributes to a larger trend of emigration, potentially shifting the country's demographics.
How common is that link between internal displacement and emigration?
It definitely can happen.
Yeah.
If people feel unsafe or see no stable future where they are, even within their own country, looking elsewhere becomes a real option, especially if the root causes of the displacement seem likely to persist.
Which leads us to another angle, the psychological impact. The analysis claims severe psychological trauma across the population.
Yeah, and they back this up with some quite stark statistics. They report 900 Israelis suffering from PTSD.
A record number, they say?
A record. And they also claim a third of Israelis are dealing with depression or other mental health issues.
A third of the population. What does that do to a society?
Well, on a large scale, widespread mental health issues can really strain healthcare, obviously, but also impact work, social bonds, just the general ability of a community to function and recover.
And they drill down into specific indicators too, right? Like alcohol consumption?
Yes, a reported 25% increase in alcohol consumption, which they explicitly link to rising drug addiction concerns.
And sleeping pills.
Sales apparently jumped 180%, a huge increase.
Wow. And suicides in the army.
They report 21 suicides in the Israeli army in 2024, but they add a note suggesting the real number is probably higher.
So how do these things, drinking, sleeping pills, suicides, how do they connect back to the idea of a psychological crisis?
The analysis essentially uses these as signals, indicators of deep stress, anxiety, maybe hopelessness. Increased substance use, trouble sleeping, and sadly, suicides, especially in the military, are often seen as signs of low morale and significant psychological distress within a population under pressure.
This seems to feed directly into the next point the analysis makes, the reverse Jewish exodus.
Right. They call it an alarming trend, mass emigration.
What are the numbers they cite?
They report 82,700 Jews left Israel in 2024.
82,700. And they say that's the highest in decades.
That's the claim. And they contrast it with a previous trend mentioning 70,000 Jews immigrating to Israel in some unspecified prior year.
So a complete reversal from net immigration to net emigration. What's the significance of that switch, according to this analysis?
They interpret it as a major vote of no confidence, a sign that belief in Israel's future as a secure, stable place is eroding significantly.
The idea being that if more people are leaving than arriving.
It suggests a fundamental shift in how people perceive their long-term prospects and safety there.
And the implication then is that this threatens Israel's long-term viability
Yeah.
if it continues.
Exactly. Demographics are fundamental. Sustained, significant emigration can impact everything: the economy, society, national strength. That's the threat the analysis highlights.
Okay, moving on to the political and moral dimensions as the analysis frames them.
Yes, they argue it's not just military and economic trouble, but also political and diplomatic collapse.
They use very strong words about Israel's global image completely destroyed.
They do, citing increased global recognition, in their view, of its occupation and crimes against humanity.
When they use terms like that completely destroyed image, what kind of evidence are they likely pointing to?
Probably things like criticism in the UN, resolutions, shifts in public opinion polls in other countries, maybe diplomatic moves like recalling ambassadors or sanctions.
And that phrase, occupation and crimes against humanity, that's obviously a very specific, critical perspective.
It is. It reflects a particular viewpoint common in certain international circles critical of Israeli policies.
They also mention countries distancing themselves diplomatically, more international condemnation.
And then they make this statement: the illusion of a democratic and peaceful Israel broke, revealing its true face as an apartheid state.
Again, apartheid state is a really loaded, specific term. How would the analysis likely justify using that?
They'd likely point to Israeli policies concerning Palestinians, both in the occupied territories and maybe within Israel itself, arguing these policies create systemic discrimination that fits certain definitions of apartheid under international law or human rights frameworks.
It's a highly controversial characterization, of course.
Extremely, but it's central to the critique this analysis presents. The overall point is that these issues are leaving Israel weaker and more isolated on the world stage, according to the source.
Then the analysis turns inward. It talks about an internal uprising and divisions within the elite, less publicized, they say.
Right. They suggest it's significant, but maybe not getting as much attention. They give examples.
Like former officials speaking out?
Yes, open opposition from people like a former Mossad chief, a former police chief.
Yeah.
High-ranking figures.
What's the impact when people like that, former insiders, start publicly criticizing the government?
It can carry a lot of weight. It suggests serious disagreement even within circles usually close to power. It can also encourage others to speak out and definitely raises questions about the government's direction.
They also mention protest camps, families of prisoners.
Yes, permanent camps set up by families of Israeli prisoners and captives right in front of the Justice Ministry, demanding an end to the war. That's a very visible form of dissent.
And divisions among the political leaders themselves.
Deep divisions, the analysis claims, over how to handle the war. So deep, they argue, that it threatens to bring down the government.
How does all this internal friction fit into the bigger picture the analysis is painting?
It reinforces the idea of a multi-front crisis. Significant dissent, political infighting, these things can paralyze decision-making, make it harder to deal with external threats, and erode public confidence.
So the analysis concludes this part by saying Israel isn't just losing externally.
But it's also imploding internally. That's the phrase they use, highlighting that internal dynamic.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. The analysis basically asks this huge question at the end, doesn't it?
It does, very directly. Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of Israel?
And it summarizes its case. A ruined economy, a society they describe as psychologically shattered, massive emigration, chaotic politics, internal dissent.
It presents all this as evidence of a critical turning point, raising doubts about the future of what it calls the Zionist project.
And that final sentence is quite definitive, isn't it?
Very forceful. While the outcome remains uncertain, one thing is certain: Israel is no longer invincible, and the resistance is pushing it inexorably towards collapse.
When they use that term resistance there, in this context, who are they referring to?
Given the source and the focus, it almost certainly means Palestinian militant groups and others actively opposing Israeli control. It's terminology used within that specific political framing.
Got it. So it's a source with a very clear, very strong argument about a multifaceted crisis potentially leading to collapse.
Absolutely, a very specific perspective.
So that's our deep dive into the arguments and the data presented in the Israel on the Brink of Collapse analysis from Rizzo International. It certainly lays out a case for a state facing, well, immense challenges.
Yeah, what really stands out is how it connects everything, the economy, the mental health, the demographics, the politics. It argues they're all feeding into each other.
Making things potentially worse,
No,
faster.
that's the picture it paints, yes.
Yeah.
A kind of downward spiral.
Which brings us to our final thought, something for you, our listener, to mull over. Given all these interconnected trends highlighted in this analysis, the economic pressures, the social anxieties, people leaving, the political splits, what do you think might be the single most significant long-term consequence for the entire region, no matter how this immediate situation plays out?